As of the day I'm uploading this video, it has been exactly 2 years since the release of the Pluto anime, the long-awaited anime adaptation of Naoki Urasawa and Takashi Nagasaki's cult classic manga, which itself was a reimagining of the greatest robot on Earth from Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy, but as a murder mystery. And in just 2 short years since the anime's release, Pluto's themes have only become increasingly more relevant to the current state of global affairs. Astro Boy's commentary was already relevant enough back in the 1950s through its commentary on the Vietnam War, xenophobia, and the emptiness of human conflict at large, and the Pluto manga was just as relevant 20 years ago through its commentary on the Iraq War and American military intervention in the Middle East. But today, as we've continued to see a global rise in racism, discrimination, hatred, and conflict, the story's message of pacifism and universal love remain more relevant today than ever before, especially with recent developments and escalations in the international geopolitical landscape. And with the proliferation of artificial intelligence in the real world, its futuristic setting has only become increasingly more thought-provoking with its parallels to what we're seeing today. All this time later, I firmly believe Pluto to be one of the greatest anime and manga of all time, and its message resonates with me more than almost any fictional work out there, especially having the context of the original Astro Boy and also Phoenix, which undoubtedly influenced Pluto almost just as much as Astro Boy. So as we celebrate the anime adaptation's 2nd anniversary, I wanted to make 2 pieces to commemorate the occasion, the first of which was a thematic analysis, and the second of which is this video you're on right now, which is focused on the Pluto anime's development history and how the series is regarded 2 years later. Personally, I find the story behind the Pluto anime's development to simultaneously be fascinating, inspiring, and yet also saddening. From the initial planning stages to the final product, it took over a decade to produce, and moreover, it was done in the absence of a traditional production committee, almost bankrupting the producer company Genko. And yet, even after facing so many different obstacles, the anime team still managed to push it out, being a true showcase of artistic perseverance. And unlike most anime produced nowadays, the Pluto anime was a passion project rather than a pure advertisement for an ongoing IP. It was the culmination of the entire career of legendary producer Masao Maruyama, who desperately wanted to adapt Pluto while still alive, not simply because of its ties to both Urasawa and Tezuka, but because of its enormously profound message. In the end, the Pluto anime in 2023 was the first Urasawa work to get an anime adaptation in almost 20 years, the last one being Monster in 2004. As most of Urasawa's stories are fairly long, they would generally require more than 4 cours for a complete adaptation, and in today's anime industry, that simply isn't feasible anymore. This, along with Urasawa's general reservations about adaptations of his works, is why, despite his stories' reception and popularity, very few have been adapted into anime. Masao Maruyama, who handled all 4 of the existing anime adaptations of Urasawa's stories, has mentioned before that Monster managing to get a full-length adaptation for 74 episodes was nothing short of miraculous. But unlike most of Urasawa's works, Pluto was only 8 volumes long, and thus could have worked within the confines of a shorter series. So if there was one Urasawa manga to adapt into an anime, it was Pluto. So towards the end of the manga serialization, Masao Maruyama indicated his interest and enthusiasm in potentially adapting Pluto in the Volume 7 afterward, with it being both an Urasawa work and, of course, a Tezuka work. Over the next few years, at conventions and in interviews, Maruyama would repeatedly reaffirm his desire and intent to adapt Pluto into an anime. Back at Japan Expo 2012, he announced that he would have liked to complete the anime by 2014 or 2015. Though as we know, that didn't happen. For years, the project went a long time without much update. As we would later come to know from interviews, between 2010 and 2017, there were a number of different pitches and cancelled attempts to turn Pluto into an anime. The first major version of the project was under NHK, where they would have been able to air the episodes monthly in a manner akin to NHK specials, thus being able to be longer than they would be had they been under a traditional half-hour weekly time slot on TV. But because of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in 2011, NHK had to divert their funds from the project, rendering it cancelled. Then a little while after, a totally separate group had come into contact with Maruyama and Urasawa to give an adaptation proposal. However, Maruyama's schedule at the time was completely full, so he had to decline working on the project. Urasawa, meanwhile, would go on to have a look at the group's animated pilot to see if they could proceed with the project without Maruyama. Unfortunately, Urasawa was dissatisfied with the pilot, particularly when it came to the look of the characters, and they cancelled the project yet another time. In 2015, Makoto Tezuka reapproached Maruyama and Urasawa to restart discussions on a potential anime adaptation, convincing Maruyama to return to the project. And in January of 2016, Maruyama and Taromaki from Genko would then found Studio M2, a pre-production focused studio which would handle the Pluto anime. For the first 2 years of this attempt on the project, Maruyama had first tried to restructure Pluto in a way that it would shorten the script to half the manga's story length. But this was so challenging, he eventually gave up on the idea and decided to just adapt the entire manga faithfully, without any substantial cuts to the story. Eventually, they had decided upon doing 8 60-minute episodes, each covering a volume of the manga. Details surrounding the project were formally announced to the public at the 2017 Annecy Animation Festival in France. And later that year, around November of 2017, they would then complete the pilot episode to pitch the project to investors, with very positive reception. 2 years later, at Annecy 2019, they would then publicly showcase teaser footage based on this pilot to attendees. And by March of 2020, the team had secured a deal with Netflix for global distribution. From then onwards, they had spent the next several years going full force on production, the majority of which was without a proper deadline. But when things had been progressing on the creative front for many years, from a fan perspective, things were extremely quiet and thus also very worrying. Back in 2017 at Annecy, they had estimated that the project would be completed by the year 2020. Before we knew it, it was mid-2022, and we'd still yet to hear anything on the anime. And all of a sudden, there was a setting materials leak on Yahoo Auctions, which suggested that the project had been cancelled. But while fans had panicked at the time of the leak, Masao Maruyama then followed up with a now-deleted tweet confirming that the anime was still in production. Yet despite this reassurance, for a good little while, little word had been provided on the project, and fans continued to worry about whether or not it was still happening. But alas, in February of 2023, they finally released a trailer and confirmed that the Pluto anime would release that year as a Netflix exclusive, breaking the 6 years of silence in stellar fashion. Fast forward to October, and the anime finally released on Netflix, and when it did, the decade-long wait was more than worth it. From the animation, to the direction, to the music, to the pacing, the anime was a phenomenal adaptation and received critical acclaim. For us fans of the manga, many of us believed it to be an improvement over the original through its various additions and rearrangements to the narrative. And for newcomers, it became their entry point into both Urasawa and Tezuka's stories, with a phenomenal introduction to the humanist philosophy that characterizes both their bibliographies. However, because of the way in which the anime was released, that being dropped all at once as a Netflix exclusive, discussions surrounding the anime simmered down fairly quickly after its release. And for something that took so much time, money, and passion, and something that I'd personally waited so long to see, it was a little saddening for that to happen. Discussions surrounding your average one-cour run-of-the-mill isekai or power fantasy anime lasts longer than discussions surrounding Pluto lasted. But even if your average Joe isn't talking about the Pluto anime 2 years later, I sure am. And for a story that has impacted me as much as Pluto has, I'm going to continue to talk about it for years to come. Back at Otakuthon earlier this year, I attended Sungwon Cho's Q&A panel and asked him about how he felt about the Pluto anime and getting to voice Brow1589. And we had a bit of an exchange wherein I stated that I believed Pluto to be the best anime of the decade thus far, and he and the audience immediately went into a little bit of a murmur and thought that I was taking things a little bit too far. But you know, I'm going to double down. 2 years after the Pluto anime's release, it may not be discussed much, but to me, at the very least, this is my pick for anime of the decade. From a thematic standpoint, it is the culmination of everything that Urasawa and Tezuka stood for, a deeply moving and thought-provoking work of kindness, pacifism, and universal love, It's a story that stands firmly against racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and hatred just generally. Will the day that hatred disappears ever truly come? We don't know. We can only hope and pray that that day will come. And in today's world, I think these sentiments ring closer to home now more than ever before. Once again, happy 2nd anniversary to the Pluto anime. Please let me know what the series has meant to you in the comments, as well as how you feel about the story behind its development. Does it inspire you as much as it inspires me? Please let me know. Special thanks to Maxi, and with that in mind, see ya!